Employees applying for political appointments within the Trump administration had to fill out a questionnaire with questions like, what part of candidate Trump's campaign message most appealed to you and why? This is not the usual process for vetting White House job applicants. And now the New York Times reports that special counsel Jack Smith is looking into these loyalty tests as part of his investigation into Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. In particular, Smith is interested in the firing of the Trump administration's top cybersecurity official, a man named Chris Krebs. Smith has gone so far as to subpoena the White House staffers he believes were involved in Krebs's firing. Now, that firing was very public when it happened. 5 days after the 2020 election was called for Biden, Krebs's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, it put out this remarkable statement about the election. In it, Krebs assured the public, in a line that was bolded for emphasis, that there was no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. That statement was a big deal because at the time, Trump was insisting that the election had been stolen, and his lawsuits were popping up all over the country. And here was his administration's agency, the one that oversaw elections and cybersecurity, saying out loud, we can assure you we have the utmost confidence in the security and the integrity of our elections. That statement incensed President Trump. And days later, he fired Chris Krebs by tweet, because that's how Trump fired people. Now, the New York Times is reporting that Jack Smith's office is interested in all of that. They want to know how McEntee's personal office interacted with the government, including the Department of Justice, in the period between Trump losing the election and January 6th. The Times reports a special counsel appears to be focused on Trump's state of mind during that period. It is likely that the special counsel wants to know the degree to which Trump himself knew that the election was not stolen while he continued to promote the big lie to his supporters and to the American public, and how Trump took action to remove any officials who were getting in the way of that narrative by telling the truth. Joining us now is Tim Heaphy, who served as the lead investigator for the January 6th committee. Mr. Heaphy, it is great to meet you distantly and get your thoughts on this. First off, in terms of what the special counsel is after in looking at the firing of Chris Krebs, do you think we're reading this accurately, that this is a bid to just try and understand what Trump was trying to do to the truth tellers in his administration?
Yes. I think this is Jack Smith anticipating a potential defense that the president may put forth, which is reliance on counsel. Or I had lots of people telling me that there were problems with the election, and that is what motivated my actions. That is an unreasonable belief. And as the Select Committee found, there were far more voices and more credible voices explaining directly to the president that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud. As Chris Krebs said in that statement, no evidence that any voting machines were compromised in any way. So to the extent that the special counsel can lay a foundation that there were truth tellers surrounding the president, telling him again and again, truthfully, that there was no such evidence, it makes his reliance on other voices less and less reasonable. And that's why it's directly relevant to a potential criminal prosecution of the former president.
And do you see Special Counsel Smith's interest in the loyalty test that was given to potential employees an extension of that line of inquiry?
Yes. Look, what happened to Chris Krebs is not uncommon. Toward the end of the administration, as your reporting just suggests correctly, there were a lot of people that drew the ire of the president for telling the truth, right? Bill Barr is another example. And then it became Jeff Rosen and other officials at the Department of Justice by, again, truthfully saying, hey, Mr. President, we've looked at this and there's just no evidence to support the incendiary things that you're saying publicly about the election. And they either lost their jobs or almost lost their jobs. And that all, his attempt to replace people that were doing the right thing with people that were willing, without a basis in fact or law, to say other things to facilitate this multi-part plan to disrupt the joint session. That is why the special counsel is asking about the loyalty test and all of these personnel changes.
Yeah, the Times reports also that the special counsel is in particular looking at what President Trump did in and around the Justice Department and trying to install Trump loyalists there. Can you flesh out for me why in particular the Department of Justice? Was that just seen as the most convenient lever with which to stay in power?
I mean, the Justice Department is where some of these very same allegations that the president was repeating publicly actually were investigated, right? Bill Barr on November the 9th sent a memo to all U.S. attorneys and all FBI field offices saying you should go forth and investigate credible allegations of voter fraud. It's important for Americans to have confidence in the outcome of the election. And that's what happened. A lot of these theories, the suitcases of ballots in Georgia, dead people voting, in Pennsylvania or Michigan, the Justice Department looked into this. So the president, when he heard Bill Barr and others say, sir, again, with all due respect, what you're saying publicly is not accurate. We have looked at this. That is what prompted the discussion about personnel change. And that, again, informs what the president knew. The special counsel's entire focus is on proving state of mind and rebutting some potential argument that the president relied upon the advice of those who said there's a basis for his actions or his statements. And that's why Chris Krebs, that's why Jeff Rosen and Rich Donahue and Bill Barr and all of the people who told him no are so important.
As we talk about the falsehoods that were spread in and around the election, I think it's important to note how much that misinformation has seeped into the groundwater. Today, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene claimed that honeypots may have been used to entrap January 6th participants. As someone who worked so diligently on this investigation, what is your reaction to that?
It's patently absurd. There's absolutely no evidence of any such, of anything. Again, it's grasping for straws. People who were there on January 6th were there because they were fed lies by the former president that the election had been stolen. They were lies because credible people like Chris Krebs consistently told him that there was no foundation for that. That makes his actions criminal. That informs the intent behind all of the multi-part political steps that he took in advance of the election, his incendiary words on January 6th, and then his inaction during the riot, all informs a showing, an evidentiary showing that he intended for that riot to succeed and for that joint session to be disrupted.